Good evening, everyone. Welcome to In Conversation with Patti M. Hall and Maria Mutch. My name is Tally Veron, and I'm the founder and publisher at the Soapbox Press, and I'm so excited to be your host for this evening. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that although we're gathering in a virtual space, the Soapbox rests on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We encourage you to learn the history of the land you are currently on as we reflect on the past and acknowledge the changes that can be made going forward in the process of truth and reconciliation. In a few short moments, we'll be welcoming our stars for this evening. Patti M. Hall, the brilliant author behind Loving Large, a mother's rare disease memoir, and Maria Mutch, an incredibly accomplished writer in her own right and the author of Know the Night, a memoir of survival in the small hours, the short story collection When We Were Birds, and the forthcoming novel Molly Falls to Earth. But before we bring them to the stage, let's take care of a little bit of housekeeping. For the first portion of the event, you will be treated to a conversation between Patti M. Hall and Maria Mutch, and maybe every so often you'll hear me coming in here and there, but I don't think you'll be hearing too much from me. To ensure the most enjoyable experience for yourself this evening, I highly recommend that you turn on speaker view. Closed captions will be available shortly, and once they are, you'll be able to just press the captions button to enable them. When we reach the Q&A portion of the event, which will start at 8 p.m. and will end at 8:30, we'll invite you to use the raise hand function that you should see appear when beside your name, if you would like to speak to the authors directly, or you can use the Q&A box to send a question, and then we'll read it out for you and address it to the authors. You can also use the chat box to talk to the other attendees and also send a message to the authors throughout the event. We encourage you to use all of the chat options throughout the event to really make this as an engaging and interactive experience as possible. Now, without further ado, let's introduce our authors. Patti M. Hall is an author, collaborator, writing coach, and project manager working with exceptional writers and thought leaders. Patti has shepherded over 20 books to publication on both traditional and self-publishing paths. As the co-host of the Reframe Your Life podcast, Patti explores the themes, structure, and meaning of their books with memoirists and authors who are telling their stories while transforming their lives. Patti is the author of Loving Large, a mother's rare disease memoir, published in 2020, and lives in Bradford, Ontario. Maria Mutch is the author of a memoir, Know the Night, which was a finalist for the Governor General's Literary Awards, a story collection, When We Were Birds, and an upcoming novel, Molly Falls to Earth, which will be released this coming spring. She teaches writing workshops at Grub Street in Boston and lives in Rhode Island. I would now like to welcome Patti and Maria.
Hi, everyone.
Hi there. Hi, Patti.
Hi, Maria. I'm great. I'm just trying to pass an invite over to some people, Tally. We have a few people not able to get in yet, so maybe we'll move slowly into this so that folks have time. I'm watching a couple of people messaging saying that they haven't entered the broadcast yet.
Okay, so, well, Patti, do you want to start off by talking a little bit about an overview of your book, just to get everybody situated?
Sure.
Or do you want to wait for another minute?
Well, you know what I would love as well is to have an overview of how we met and the inspiration. I'd love to start that way too, as maybe that's a preempt we can talk about that, and how your memoir, Know the Night, was one of the inspirations behind my not my writing Loving Large, but my staying with Loving Large. This is Know the Night.
Oh,
I think
this
is the Canadian cover, right, Maria?
Yep. Yep.
Right. So I was an Uber fan in 2014. I love that. I was an Uber fan of Know the Night in 2014 when it came out. I hadn't seen a book that showed me an author writing comfortably in all of her roles, including mother. and able to make her child, her exceptional child, and their extraordinary experience together central to a book without it being about the child. And I wondered how I was going to do that when I didn't want to violate my son's privacy, when we were still living in the space of an active diagnosis and treatment. And it seemed too early to tell a story for a young man who couldn't choose to tell the story for himself yet, or at least hadn't. And although he was very supportive of me writing the book at the time and continued to be, it had to be my story because that really was the one that was feeling compelling. And Know the Night was an inspiration for me. So in 2014, my being the introvert, I sent an email to the author, one Maria Mutch, and we forged an email relationship. Then one day I recall her saying, "Hey, why don't we go to Iceland, to the Iceland Writers Retreat?" And I thought, this is crazy. We've never met in person before. We're going to meet in Reykjavik, which we did. A year later, we met in Reykjavik, and the rest is history, as they say. We've been friends all of this time, and we spend a lot of time talking about books. But as I say, in the acknowledgements of Loving Large, we also spend a lot of time talking about beautiful things and nature and our sons and the writing life and the process of crafting books and the irresistible penchant that we both have to tell story. And among a million other things, those are the basis of what I consider to be the finest relationship of its kind ever known to man. Seriously, should be documented by stars, don't you think? So
Yeah.
Know the Night was an inspiration for me, long story short, and continues to be, Maria. And I thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you for asking me, Patti. And you know what? I have to point out, though, that my recollection of the whole Iceland thing is that you were the one who suggested it. That is how. All right. So, and here's where we're going to get into the whole idea of how memory works in writing memoir.
Right.
But to start off, first, I also want to say thank you to Tolly and Soapbox Press for having us, because this is so wonderful. And to me, there's nothing better than to have a conversation about writing, especially right now. And there's something about memoir in particular that just seems so incredibly vital. It's had a really long run for the last couple of decades, and I think it's going to just keep going because we're always looking for an understanding of the human condition. And often that understanding comes through really specific stories that seem very different from our own particular lived experience. And that's where we can lift a very, very specific story into the universal. And that's what you and I have talked about that, Patti, many, many times, and it's what you've done with your book, Loving Large, because there are absolutely wildly universal themes of love, familial love, parental love, but also struggle and Blackness that comes from being on a trajectory that was unexpected. So, and memoir often consists of, a story that was unexpected, and your story was wildly unpredictable. So, can you unfold your story for us?
Sure. In 2008, I had two active big boys who active in all of the average ways. And Aaron and Justin were 15 and 13 at the time. And sometime before Aaron's 16th birthday, he complained of random headaches that were becoming more difficult to deal with and sore knees. And I knew my kids. I knew one was a little more of a complainer than the other. One might mention the soreness more than the other. The other one could be flung off a bike into the wilderness and wouldn't mention that he had a sore leg. But I wondered over a period of days if I shouldn't pay a little bit more attention. And a trip to the pediatrician's office proved to be quite a cautionary tale for the pediatrician, who looked at my then 6'5" son who was exhibiting myriad symptoms that to me had looked like the features of a growing child. And she gave us a prescription list of tests. A CT scan revealed a 3.5 centimeter tumor on his pituitary and diagnosed gigantism. One of the interesting things was that I had a suspicion about gigantism, and it's the adult form of the disease, acromegaly. I had a suspicion because my brilliant hairdresser had an experience with the disease herself and recognized features in Aaron's appearance that were starting to represent those typical of gigantism and acromegaly. And I know that we'll get into that further this evening, but as a mother, I didn't see those things. I just saw my child, and I expected him to be tall. The book follows our treatment path, my acceptance and lack of acceptance of what was happening to him, as well as my guidance of him and for him through the medical journey. Most of the book takes place over a 6 to 8 month period, and then jumps to his periods of treatment by radiation, and then comes into the latter stages of sort of 2 years ago when he's grown into being an advocate for himself and turns the table on me and thinks maybe it's time I looked after myself a little bit because he's doing better. It's a mother's story with a significant appearance of two great big boys as the main characters. Something that I know shares a little bit of drama with your own, and maybe you could set the stage a little bit for yours, Maria, so when we move back and forth a little bit and I reference Know the Night, folks will know really how very much we had in common, although not in our books and our approach, certainly as mothers, even less so as writers, but certainly with our memoirs. There were some thematic connections that I think are really profound.
Yeah, we're in the very interesting position of both having had two boys, the older one of which has what would be considered maybe I realize in your situation, whether it's a genetic anomaly or not is sort of, undisclosed at this point, but where there is what would be considered an abnormal situation by other people. And then we have younger sons who are neurotypical.
Yes.
And in my case, I wrote Know the Night about my older son who has Down syndrome and autism and doesn't speak. And he's 23 right now, but he experienced, when he was from about age 9 to 11, just the most incredible sleeping disorder. And so he was up at night, I was up at night with him. And so the book is works around that access of being up at night and experiencing incredible loneliness, but also wonder. And it also led at the time to an interest for me in polar exploration. And so I had come across a book by Admiral Richard Byrd called Alone. And it is his story of being in Antarctica in the 1930s in a hut by himself, removed from his men. He was there for 4 months before he almost died. He was rescued by his men, and he went on to write a memoir about it. And while I was in that period of sleeplessness with my son, I read his book, and his book spoke to me so deeply, in part because of his experience with isolation, but also with night and yes, all of the incredible beauty that he was experiencing, because while he was there, it was a polar night. So where the sun wasn't rising at all. So I wove his story into my own. So that's it.
You know, and I recall opening the front page of your book and feeling like I've come home. And first of all, you talk about commiserating, and I hope that we touch on that again, which is a very different kind of comfort than what we're used to. And folks who are caregivers or who are in a traumatic situation know the magnetism of finding someone to commiserate with, or something to commiserate with. And I'm going to read the one line from your opening. There are 2 lines on your opening page, the first of which is, commiseration is a kind of rescue. And another, there's one thing to be said about the night. It's that companions are beneficial. No one should be alone. And certainly that was the purpose in my writing, was to explore my aloneness, yet my isolation of what I felt was rowing a sailboat alone in a dark sea with a child under each arm. I wasn't entirely alone, but I made myself alone, and the rarity of Aaron's disease made me even more alone. And it was both choice and foisted upon me, I think. And I've never felt one was more powerful than the other. It just was a situation I found myself in. You know, we had a medical marvel, but we also had a rare disease that for which treatment had to be sought. And I found your discussion of commiseration as a kind of rescue, how much I yearned for that, yet denied it from those who offered it to me because they truly could not commiserate with me. And that continues to be my defense and continues to be the truth for me, is until I found other mothers of kids with extraordinarily rare, uber rare diseases, disorders, chronic and critical conditions, I didn't have anyone that understood how I'd lost my mind and blown up my marriage and destroyed my closest friendships. And all I wanted to do was make sure my children and their mental health was as stable as it could be. I so completely focused on that I lost sight of myself. And that's the story of Loving Large, really, is that I loved so hard that I isolated myself to the point of feeling lost at sea and denied myself commiseration. And then so perhaps in writing, I commiserate now. And in finding you, certainly found that, and in finding the readers and those that really resonate with the message to be my commiseration. And in that way, the book was healing for me in an unconventional way.
So Patti, I know that, you know, because we've spent the last number of years talking at length about, you know, every aspect of writing memoir. And I know that you, like most people, there is a point right at the very beginning where you're working on a manuscript, or you're starting to play with the very original ideas. And there is sort of an internal struggle. And I know that you've talked about that waffling about whether to tell this story or not. So why tell this story?
You know, the easy answer would be why not to tell this story. But why to tell this story was in both its distinctiveness and its exceptionality, and in the way that it could be rendered relatively commonplace because it was traumatic. The reactions split a family. The burden was borne by a family, borne by me. Certainly there's a motherhood element that is undeniable. There is a fear of something attacking our children that I think is primordial for parents. And not just for parents, but those who love young children, those who love helpless, wondrous, extraordinary little beings. And I felt that there was a relatability to that I wanted to tell, was what happens when we love this hard? And what happens when we love so unconditionally that I would never have wanted it to be different? And for me, the bottom line was I told the story because so many people said it would feel helpful to them. It's a little cliche, but it has ended up being truer every day that a new reader reaches out to me and says, thank God you said something about this, because somebody gets what it's like to completely lose your marbles, to be so entirely focused on one person's needs that nothing else matters. And the other things that I let go are a large part of the story. And I sacrificed willingly. And as you say in your opening lines, without regret, we pay a price of the knowledge that disease is in our midst, or the price of the knowledge of difference and being impacted by something. Yet it never goes to regret. We simply love unconditionally the child that we have or the person that we care for.
Yeah, and you know what, Patti, I don't think that that's a cliche at all. I think that's the central driving issue behind writing in general. It's that desire to connect, to reach out from that very individual space that we find ourselves in. That I mean, that's the human condition. And that's what makes memoir and our particular stories hopefully interesting to other people, but also beyond that, that there is some kind of a meaning that is created. Yeah.
We're living the meaning, aren't we?
Yeah.
You know, and isn't it lovely to name it? And I felt like I was releasing myself from the wonder of it all by naming it. And you know, it's this, and I know we'll step into this space, but you call it, or someone else in your world called it, sort of a secret society.
Yeah.
And I was already part of one and didn't realize it, and felt proud to name it in Loving Large, and was thrilled when a brilliant editor thought of the title, which I didn't. I got close and never got to it, but of course that's what it is, right? Is the human condition, the meaning behind loving exceptionally large.
And so the focus of that love, of course, in the book is Aaron. And Aaron is a really interesting conduit, I think, in terms of this story, because he channels, to me, this is my interpretation of it. He is the embodiment of a lot of the emotion that you withheld. And we can talk about withholding a little bit later in the conversation, because that's a really important aspect of writing, what you put in and what you don't.
Right.
And I see that in Aaron, he has tantrums as he's, you know, as his situation is unfolding and dawning on him. He has a very complex, robust reaction. He has tantrums, he is sarcastic, he's wildly funny. His personality is brought out so beautifully in the book, and he seems to be the holder, the placeholder of a lot of the emotion that surely you must have been experiencing as well. And so there's this really wonderful sense of energy that comes through him. So one of the aspects is the idea of uncertainty, where his condition sort of opens this door for you, for him, for the entire family, of what happens now that we are officially not sort of quote unquote normal. Not that I think that you ever really bought into any ideas of normalcy, but certainly when you know you're placed in a situation like you've been placed in, then suddenly it hits home. One of the aspects that also is channeled through Aaron is humor. And that is such a delightful aspect of this book. So we have this really rich, dark aspect of this looming presence of gigantism, his tumor, the treatment that's going to happen, the personality transformation that's happening within your son as he copes with this, everything that is transforming inside of you in terms of your own emotional reactions, the impact that this has been having. And then there is this incredible prickly light of humor that goes through the entire book. And, you know, I think even functions, it's so strong in this book and so well placed that to me, it almost functions as a piece of the structure.
Beautiful. Thank you. You know, it was also a compelling coping mechanism, but even more accurately told in the book, I think, than I was aware it was in our lives. And I love that it meant so much to you.
Oh, absolutely. Patti, your book, because I read it again, obviously to prepare for tonight. And I know the story inside and out, and it is still riveting and amazing to read it again. So thank you. So thank you. And all right, so with regard to Aaron, what was your approach? Was it difficult to I mean, this is your child.
Yep.
You know, how do you lay all of that bare? How do you navigate writing about your own child?
You know, had he been a younger child, I might have had less conscience about it, which may be fair or erroneous. But I was aware that he was diagnosed just before or on, in fact, his 16th birthday. And he is now matured to a 25-year-old plus man. He's just 27 now. He'll slap me for this. But I couldn't tell everything. It wouldn't have been right. There were highlights of things that were okay to tell, but things about what we experienced in doctor's appointments, and particularly around the future of whether he would have children, how he was feeling about himself, his appearance, the impact the disease was having on his mobility and his confidence, the way he felt about some of the symptoms. That was not my story to tell. What I did do is talk about the things that Aaron brought to me and asked me to carry for him in a figurative way. And he was very outspoken about not wanting to be his own advocate in those early days. He's still quite so, actually, but luckily is a little more asymptomatic now. And as an adult, happy to carry the burden of his own medical treatment and medical future now, because it isn't quite so precarious, but it was then. And, he didn't want to know things then. So I learned everything, and he tasked me with that. He was always a very outspoken, but, he was emotionally mature, quite young, classic eldest child, and saucy, and said, you do this, and I'll let you know if I want to know anything. But, that didn't mean that there weren't profound moments where I wrote about the poignancy of his wondering. There was a moment in the book where he asks me, while he's cramming in about 4 pieces of pizza, he asks me if I know when he's going to die. No one wants to have that conversation with their child. No one wants to have that conversation with their best friend. And he said, I don't really want to know. I just want to know that you know. And I said, I know what they've told me, but of course no one ever really knows. And he's like, no, don't give me the prefabricated bullshit line. As long as you know, I feel safe, was what he was telling me. So the way I told the story featuring him was to tell the pieces I knew that he would also reflect on, having been epiphanies, significant, memorable, or as profound stepping stones on our way along. And as a student of the stages of grief, I overlaid a little bit of the stages of grief on our book, and in fact adjusted this draft so that it wasn't as noticeable. But I watched him really closely as he grieved his childhood. He grieved his health. He grieved feeling like the other kids felt. And what he shared with me that I knew was something he'd consider memorable, those were the things I shared very, very carefully. And I shared them very sparingly. I cut more than half of this book, thank God for great editors, because it was important that it not be his story and that he then be allowed to tell it. And maybe he will someday. But was my journey of watching him succumb to the illness, thrive in the illness, and accept the new normal. And my showing him doing it, of course, was so that I could exempt myself from showing that I wasn't accepting it in the same way he was, which I think is his conclusion by the end of the book, is that, as you very aptly said, what Aaron is expressing is in fact everything I'm not, and I wasn't. And the reason I didn't allow myself to commiserate, and I spurned those that tried to support me, my sister, my closest friends, others in the medical community, was because if I dwelt in that space for too long, it would have consumed me. And I could not be consumed by it because he couldn't. And I was someone's mother, and I took that responsibility to be more, well, I still take that responsibility to be the greatest of all for me. And it was my job to carry that stuff so that he wouldn't have to. If there was any time left for he and his brother to still be kids, I wanted to give that to him and to both of them. And I hope that I did in some way, shape, or form, even if it was to my own demise, because I think that's what we do when we care and we love this way.
So with that in mind, I'm wondering if you would read from page 44.
Sure.
This is, I love this section for its combination of, it unfolds your sense of guilt, but it also, I think this will be so helpful in orienting our listeners in terms of how gigantism was manifesting in Aaron at the time.
Okay. This drops us into the chapter entitled Advocate, and the structure of my book is shaped around the 18 or 20 roles that I felt like I took on in order to survive this time, and this one is Advocate, meaning medical advocate. 3 20-something nurses, all sporting similar versions of loose-fitting pastel scrubs and Crocs, watched. Do they shop together? It was comical to see Aaron's doctor measuring him, hand on his shoulder for support as she leaned across him, resting his chart flat on his thick brown hair to ensure accuracy. It was a time before smartphones, or mine would have been clicking pictures madly. I pulled a couple of school photos of Aaron and Justin from my purse, and Dr. Kirsch looked closely at them and then stapled them neatly into her folder's inside cover. Are your high-cut running shoes comfortable for you, and what size do you wear? She asked Aaron. They're the only thing I feel stable in, and they're a 14. I turn my ankle a lot without them. I do better in skates than shoes. Dr. Kirsch was hitting on so many details. If I'd considered them together the way she was doing, I might have raised an earlier alarm, and I was the one struggling to get him up for school when he was exhausted from a rotten night's sleep, seeing how he'd sweat in his pillowcase, giving him Tylenol more and more frequently for his headaches, and buying the expensive leather high-top shoes that were so difficult to find once his size went beyond a 13. Why hadn't I been alarmed when Aaron outgrew his shoes so quickly? Or when the height markings on the kitchen wall jumped up by multiple inches instead of fractions of an inch like Justin's? I wondered if Dr. Kirsch could see the tears stinging my eyes or sense the mother's guilt building up inside me as I listened to my boy describe how he'd felt sick to his stomach a lot lately. He told Dr. Kirsch about severe cramps in the morning, the pain he felt walking any distance, and being so hungry all the time, but dreading that he'd feel nauseated after eating. How had I not noticed how crappy my son was feeling? Dr. Kirsch shifted in her rolling chair to face Aaron and me. Are you an anxious person, Aaron? Aaron shrugged. I guess I am. I sweat all the time, even when it's cold out. I'm always hot. I take an extra shirt with me everywhere for when I sweat through. Mom keeps one in her car. I get really nervous, like coming here in the car today. Ask my mom. I never shut up because I'm so nervous. He'd proven his own point. Dr. Kirsch examined him. Don't move your eyes or your head. Keep looking at my nose. She extended her arm at shoulder height, formed a fist, and pointed her index finger. She slowly moved her arm to bring her finger toward Aaron and asked him to say now when he was able to see it. She repeated the action from right and left, above and below for each eye. I'd never seen this done before and never been through it myself. I'd learned later that this innocuous little test, which seemed both casual and completely subjective, helped her conclude that Aaron was beginning to have peripheral vision loss. Stand up again and then bend from the waist. She ran her small hands up either side of his spine. His back is perfect, she said, turning to me. Oh, good. So he doesn't have scoliosis. Too bad about that pesky brain tumor. She took Aaron's blood pressure and temperature. Her eventual report noted that Aaron had hypertension and peripheral vision field cuts, but she didn't say that to us.
Thank you. I think that is such a wonderful illustration of sort of what is beginning to unravel for the two of you, and the journey that you're about to go on. What's really interesting about Aaron too is his, it's not just his presence, but he develops this incredible way of seeing. It's almost as if this position that he has found himself in plunges him a little bit back into, as you point out, being a younger child who is, having very strong emotional reactions, and then he goes the other way and has this incredible wisdom. And it turns up right around, it's before he has his operation, and there is, your marriage has fallen apart. You and your husband have separated. Yeah. You are keeping this a secret, and you are with your husband and Aaron in the doctor's office, and you have to sign a permission paper. And you are faced with this sense of you are the one who is now responsible, because you had asked for that in the divorce settlement, that you wanted to be the one making medical decisions. And now you have this moment where you're the one who is supposed to sign it. And you don't want to be the only one who has to sign it. You don't want to be sort of plunged further into this feeling of aloneness and being on this island. And your son all of a sudden says, why don't we all sign it?
Right.
I just think that's one of the most extraordinary moments of the book. And yet it's a small moment in this incredibly tumultuous journey that you're on, but it says so much about what happens to us as people when we are faced with incredible difficulty and have to grow up and have to become very wise. I also want to talk a little bit about the genetic aspect and the sort of roots of gigantism, because maybe you can unfold for people a little bit about the difference between acromegaly and gigantism, because they are related, but also separate things. And I also wanted to point out the doctor who says no more giants.
Right.
She's talking about eradicating gigantism. And this hooks to the idea of wanting to prevent something that we know is causing tumult in our lives and our children. But then the way that we become invested in our own story, and that through our own experience, we are changed by our story and actually wouldn't have it any other way. So can you unpack all that?
Sure. There is a little bit of attention in the book on the root cause of gigantism, less so than I had intended, and there will be more so in a subsequent book, because I explore the history and roots of giants in a forthcoming book. But what happened was, in wondering if there could be a genetic cause here, we discovered that there was a member of Aaron's father's family who had had a tumor that was related to this one. And it was worthy of exploration. And by virtue of my becoming pretty communicative in the world and reaching out to others with the disease, I aligned myself with an American advocate society. At the time, it was the only one, acromegaly community. And a person there said to me, hey, there's something going on in England right now that might be relevant to your child. Gigantism is the prepubescent manifestation of a disease which is best known for a secreting tumor which secretes growth hormone in enormous quantities in Aaron's case. So it was not only a large tumor, but it was secreting at 37 times normal. So Aaron was effectively growing 6 inches a year, and that would have accelerated had we not been able to slow the tumor's impact. When I reached out to Dr. Marta Corbinitz in England, she immediately got back to me, because I had a young man in my life with gigantism who was going to age. And when he reached puberty, if he could, and when he accelerated into acromegaly, the disease could change forms. The features that she was specifically researching might change, and her interest really was in this genetic origin. In fact, Marta Corbinitz is the doctor who is credited with being behind what's called the Irish giant gene, the FIPA gene. She's been a great support to me over the years and sort of acts as an ancillary consultant to Aaron's case when I have crazy questions, and has taught me everything I know about the disease. She called one night out of the blue. So there I was. It was a typical night. Everyone who's going through COVID right now will know about this. I'm sitting across the kitchen table with Aaron. He's doing his homework, and the phone rings, and I put her on speaker because it's a crazy number. I don't know what this is. And she starts to ask me questions about the child with gigantism. What she's interested in is other members of the family. So we go through every member of the family on my then husband's side, because that was where we had a tumor that could be considered related. A member of the family had an acromegalic tumor that was removed in his 20s. He's since deceased, unfortunately. But we wondered then if it could be related. What had never dawned on me, and then dawned on me in two traumatic moments that happen in this section in the book, which is at about 194, 195, is that it occurs to me for the first time that I have another male child with the same biological makeup as Aaron. This could be affecting Justin too, and I might not have seen it. Because gigantism and acromegalic tumors, pituitary adenomas, are very slow growing, they can be present and be having some or little impact for a very long time before the symptomology progresses. In Aaron's case, his first doctor told me it could have been a 10 to 12-year progression of this tumor by the time I saw the impact on his growth. So you can imagine what I went through, the horror of, oh my God, this could be happening to Justin too. Is it bad enough that this disease is impacting one of my children? This could be happening to Justin. And in fact, this could be happening to me, my ex-husband, or any member of the family at any given time and not be perceptible. The impact of that otherness coming down on me was extraordinary. But the most impactful thing at all is when she said to me, we need people to understand that giants die in their 20s. We need there to be no more giants. Defensiveness rose within me, but my son is a giant and he's here. What about him? So I quickly shifted back to her point, and she meant prevention. But what she meant was preventing my extraordinary, magical, wonderful son being on the planet. And he was already here, potentially his cousins, extended members of a family on either side. We didn't know, and we had no conclusion genetically. We still don't have conclusion genetically. And I was offended for him. I was offended for myself, because here, as you pointed out, is my child who is perfect in every way in his imperfection, and his back was perfect. And I remember my favorite line from your book is when Gabriel was born, you said, he arrived and he was perfect, because they are perfect. We wouldn't love them any differently. I wouldn't have loved Aaron less if he were shorter. And she might eradicate giants. So while I understood at the time what she was doing in a very caring way was breaking it to me that could we prevent young men and women who have a disease that has them grow to the extreme and be subjected to the stigma and impact of judgment and misperceptions and misjudgments about them. She also meant medically. This is a painful disease that is bone bending, that is has congenital impacts on organs. The pressure on the heart, the circulatory system, the lungs is incredible. My son's body is only 6'11". It could have grown to 7. His body, his height could have gone to 7.5 feet tall, but yet his organs were only prepared for about 6'4", 6'5". That's an impact by anyone's stretch. So that's what she was referring to. But I was so offended, and worse yet, she was on speakerphone and he heard it. So although he hadn't embraced the label giant at the time, all I could think of is, and I wrote, what the hell am I going to say to him when I get off the phone? Because I had allowed a medical opinion to come into our environment and label him different and not wanted, not desirable because of his disease. If the goal medically was to eradicate giants or people with gigantism, it was, I never got over that. And however much I admired her, I knew what she meant, but the impact was done, wasn't it? And he heard it.
The interesting thing about our situations and the situation of every parent who has a child who is considered to be different is that no one outside of that circle wants what we have. And yet that what we have is something that, because we've experienced it, we understand how closely that adheres to awakening, that there is something about that experience that we would not change, that we have become different people through that experience, which is partly the function then of writing about it. So this connects, Patti, to, there are a few different ideas that are going around in my head and things that we have talked about over the years. So there is this idea of difference and anomaly. There is also, there was a sentence that I want to read because I loved this sentence. The irony was sickening. Aaron couldn't face dreaming because a rare disease had stolen his certainty in any kind of future. This idea of stealing certainty. And that sentence arrives after the two of you have been working on a project for school where the students are tasked with putting together a dream board about what their future is going to look like. And his future, he understands, has been called into question. And so there is this entrance of uncertainty. And to me, this is the place where we transform as humans, that there is a mystery that is set in front of us that was there to begin with. I mean, we arrived in this place, we're in this world, and we are no longer afforded a place of putting blinders on and not fully seeing. So these situations have a way of waking people up. So uncertainty comes into this. Difference and anomaly are paired with that. To me, these things connect to the sacred. And I don't mean sacred in the religious sense. I mean it in the very broadest sense, that it connects to the mystery of what it is to be human. So all of these things are functioning together. So would you read another passage for us? Sure. And this one underscores the idea of Aaron and you being regarded by other people. So this would be the Blue Jays.
Okay. Where are we? We're on a page 157 in a chapter very aptly called The Punching Bag.
Yeah.
In addition to our follow-up medical appointments, we did some day trips, drive-ins, and summer release films. I finally took time to nest a little in the new house, adding a few pieces of outdoor furniture and having the boys' rooms painted the primary colors they'd insisted on. Pressed on by the desire that there would be some highlights for him, some good times while Justin carried on with sports camps, Aaron and I did other things like the zoo, the mall, and a lot of restaurants. That summer baseball games became a natural for us. It was tough to cram Aaron's long legs into a regular seat at the stadium, but we found that if I kept my legs tightly crossed and over to one side, my extra legroom became his, and he could manage, and the food came to the seats. Between innings at one game, we were standing just behind the accessible seating area, cramming our mouths with huge, overpriced hot dogs when I felt stares, not at me, but at Aaron. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man just a few feet away turn in his seat to face us. He was about 60 and was sitting beside an older woman and a 20-something woman who was next to a young man in a wheelchair. The young woman raised her hand to her mouth while staring at my boy and said, "Oh my God, in a tone that was somewhere between horror and disgust. All four of them were looking back and forth at one another, exchanging whispered words and glances. I felt the heat rise in my face, not the sting of tears, the heat of anger. I looked at Aaron. He was completely aware of it. "Just let it go, Mom." He was looking away, as if they didn't exist, eating his hot dog and staring out over the blue metal railing. "It happens all the time. I'm used to it. You shouldn't have to be." It was so close and so blatant, the rudest gawking I'd been through with him. This felt like we were in a ring at a circus. Something defiant rose in me, emerged out of me. "What are you looking at?" I said loudly. Then, before turning, I looked directly at the man in the wheelchair. You know what? I would have expected better from someone who must get treated like this all the time. I touched the back of Aaron's arm and steered us into the crowd. Stigma was in our lives now. Aaron was managing way better than I was. He didn't entertain the questions, however polite. He rebuffed them, unless a child asked. Kids were amazed by his height because they saw something else, because they didn't contrast Aaron to their self-image. He was not different than them. He was marvelous. I wished I could protect him from the gauntlet of public opinion, of stigma and social obstacles, which could leave the most indelible wounds.
Thank you. I love that scene. That is so incredible. You were there. So this connects further to ideas of mythology. So, and our misconceptions, I think you would say, through through myths that have been developed and handed down, and then also turned into fairy tales,
right?
Characters in movies, etc. There is a whole set of characteristics and a story that has emerged around the idea of giant, that then is in sort of a collision with your own lived experience and that of your son, which is very different. So can you talk a little bit about your investigation of mythology and how that bigger mechanism affects you?
So I stepped into it by accident. I stepped into investigating the myth around giants because I wondered why these awkward, rude, really unbearable questions were coming at us so often. And I wondered why people presumed my son couldn't answer their question, presumed he couldn't hear them. They seemed to presume he couldn't respond to their reaction or that he wasn't seeing it. In fact, they treated him like he wasn't there. And I couldn't piece it together. And then I thought about what I knew about giants. So I went back a lot farther than current manifestations of giants. We see giants in battle in Game of Thrones. We see fictitious giants in battle, and we see them sort of overblown size-wise. But Aaron is almost 7 feet tall, 8 feet tall. This is not a completely uncommon thing. So I became aware that if he's subjected to this, that this is really not just sizeism, but this is every ism that there was. And he was sacred to me. He was magical to me. He was extraordinary to me. And he was being treated like a circus sideshow half the time, and the other half the time, like he couldn't have responded and didn't have the multisensory capacity to even be aware in a nonverbal way, had that been true of what was going on. So I took a look at giants historically, and then I took a look at the symptoms of the disease. And I'll tell you, one of the pieces of writing on this is written in David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell, although he's not the first to write about it. He certainly wrote about it very astutely when he told the story of David and Goliath. And if we do go back just to that, we see how very common the features of Goliath became in folklore, became particularly in fairy tale. Giants aren't just the fee-fi, faux-fum ones, but let's think about the giant in Jack the Giant Killer and Jack and the Beanstalk. It's not the fictitious piece that, the giant lives in a castle and maybe at the top of a beanstalk. Well, isn't that lovely? And wouldn't we all love to live at the top of a beanstalk and in a castle? It's that he eats children. It's that he crunches on the bones of children. It's that he walks with a strange, lumbering gait. It's that he has this big, booming voice. He can't enunciate words, and he sounds in some way intellectually impaired when what it is his inability to enunciate. And that is actually true of the disease. And for me, this became fascinating, that pieces that were clinically true, medically true, found their way into myth, ancient storytelling from as far back as we can imagine. There was an accuracy there. It wasn't just fairy tales. So while I was a little offended that the fairy tales had convinced people, thereby then they would bump into my child on the street or in an elevator at a hospital, and they would presume that he might be, a little somebody they should be a little scared of, or maybe he wouldn't express himself clearly, or maybe he couldn't see very well, all features of these fictitious giants. But even more extraordinary to me was that there was clinical and medical truth in the ancient elements of giants, which has always led me to believe that ancient storytelling, of course, was based in fact, and that ancient giants, of course, were as real as giants are now. And we've turned it into a scary fairy tale to basically scare little children in the Elizabethan age into going to bed early. And that is now the reality of my son's lived experience. And that isn't just about giants. We're also talking about those with dwarfism, albinism, ichthyosis, other visually stigmatizing diseases that for some reason became so compelling in storytelling that mythology, which was based in fact, rolled into fairy tales. And if you see children's books now, certainly back even to 50 years ago, you'll see giants beware, and don't talk to the giant's scary. The giant's tall. And in fact, he's just a tall, or she's a tall person. And isn't this true of every misperception? And they're not, I had to look at it in order to be fascinated by it, but then I also have to pull back occasionally and remember, this is the world that my son lives in. This is his daily lived experience of being stared at and having fingers pointed at him.
So that brings us really nicely into humor. And do you think that you could end with us, because we are just about out of time, with the section of
some giant jokes?
Giant jokes. I just love that section so much.
Sure. Let me read this. This is from page 87. We're in Vigilante. I added a 1-inch turquoise binder with a magnetic clasp to a stack of notebooks that I took with me everywhere. It held essential test results, referral letters, and a cheat sheet of locations and phone numbers of doctors' offices and labs. I really could have used a smartphone back then. I started keeping a Word document with dates, measurements, weights, and hormone levels, not only because I couldn't remember, my brain was rapidly turning to mush, but because I'd already learned that passing it to the person creating a new chart or doing a pre-consult for the next specialist could achieve priority 1, minimizing Erin's frustration. I didn't want us bickering about accuracy in front of someone. I didn't want us to be that pain in the ass family that grouses in the office while the doctor is trying to get to the important facts. I knew that my diligence on this front worked, because the follow-up letters sent from one specialist to another described Erin as a polite young man and a well-mannered teenager. They were more likely to make recommendations quickly and go out of their way for that kind of child and his congenial, well-informed mother, and I needed that tactical edge. And we were becoming good entertainment too. We were developing a bit of a shtick, and with the comedic timing of a pair who'd done stand-up together for a long time. How tall is he? A stranger or new doctor, nurse, or lab technician would ask me, almost never addressing him. 6'6" or so, I'd say, audible gasp. That was his height in the early medical days, but the second digit changed to 7, 8, 9, 10, and finally 11 in time. Will he get any bigger? Yep, he's still growing. Then to Erin, they might say, do you play basketball? Only if you're a Raptors recruiter. He had a vast repertoire of responses. My personal favorite was, no, I'm a jockey. That always left them with their mouths hanging open, and the delay while they figured out the size humor gave us time to make our escape. We knew how to tailor our material to the audience, whether they were little kids, groups of teens, kindly older people, or name-tagged hospital personnel, and to the particular look on the face of the gawking person. We could meet the rude, demeaning ones right where they stood. These ones would often look at Erin and then more than a foot down at me and ask, how'd he get so tall? I'd be the straight man. He's a giant, like Andre the Giant. Well, how'd that happen? The person might then ask, as if inspired by some movie plot about alien babies or gigantic man-eating plant pods. I was breastfed, Erin would lob in. Poker-faced, we'd both step off the elevator and then giggle our heads off as we sauntered down another hospital corridor.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Patti. I could talk about this for hours.
You're a gem. I think we're being joined by Tally now.
I felt like that was a good time to come in because I could listen to both of you for hours. That was phenomenal. Thank you both so much. And because we're not all meeting in person, I give you both a round of applause for such an incredible hour. Thank you both so much.
Tally.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us, Tally.
So before we launch into our Q&A, I know that not everyone will be able to stick around. So I just wanted to thank everyone who was able to join us for the first hour of our event. Please make sure that you get your very own copy of Loving Large if you haven't yet. And if you would like a signed copy of Loving Large, then Patti very kindly can arrange that for you. You can send an email to contact@thesoapboxwrites.com or reach out to Patti through her website, and she will also be happy to help you out.
Sure will.
So as we turn things over to our Q&A, we can do this a couple of ways. If you would like to drop your question in the Q&A box, we will get to it that way. Or you can use the raise your hand function and we will well, as it says, allow you to talk, and then you can
Wow.
actually speak and we can hear your voice and we can start a bunch of different
I'd
conversations.
love that. Does anyone want to ask something live so we can hear your voice? That would be great.
Oh, we have a question or perhaps a comment from Cora P. I just want to say hello to Maria and that I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you talk about loving large and Patty's experience. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Cora.
Thank you, Cora.
Oh, and we're getting we were getting some comments in the chat. Catherine Hamilton has to sign off, but earlier she said, beautiful book, nicely done, all my best, which is very kind.
Very
And from
sweet.
Kate Johnson, amazing talk. Oh, and we have 2 hands. This is so exciting. Okay. Suzanne Dawson, we're going to start with you and then we'll move on to Kate Johnson. So Suzanne.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well done, Patty. Very articulate and warm and funny, and you know, I felt like I sort of took the journey with you, and we love our children so deeply. I really, I struggled, my daughter struggled with different things, but they were paralyzing in our lives.
Yes.
And I was her mouthpiece. And so it's very interesting to watch you do that with such eloquence, and it's so balletic, and it's so, who knew that this was going to be something that you would do. Help me understand how this has changed you.
I wish I could deflect, Suzanne. Great question. I want to ask you how it's changed you, because I suspect we have it in common. I put off coping with a lot of things in my life, not because I thought I was selfish, but selfless. That I had no altruistic motives here that I was aware of. I simply couldn't look after him and look after myself at the same time. So in many ways, I put off living for a long time. And at the end of the book, that is absolutely the conclusion both of my sons now openly declare to me. Although I thought I had crammed a lot of living into 10 years, they felt, I think, a burden of some kind, that I hadn't done things that maybe they thought other folks would have, or other people my age might have. I don't know if that's true. I wouldn't change a thing. I say that in the book when I go back to Sick Kids Hospital, and a person that I'm dating says to me, isn't it horrifying to go back and relive that? And I thought, no, it isn't, because that was my lived experience. So how has it changed me? Put simply, I don't take a whole lot for granted anymore. And if I do, I slap myself up the side of the head really quickly, because I'm a walking, talking example that one phone call can change everything. And we don't get any warnings for the things that are coming. And, I fall into the same flop that others do. There's no answer to getting this right. And at the end of the book, I don't try to get it right. I don't have a solution, and I haven't figured it out. But I do feel that I have to put my money where my mouth is. That now it is, okay, he's stronger, he can do this on his own. It's time to stop using this as a closeted excuse for my not being brave. And that's what's changed with me the most, is it's time for me to be brave the way he wants me to be, instead of feeling like staying small will protect him, because it won't.
And so would you say it's the last number of years where you've stepped out and you're finding yourself and making up for some lost time?
It's right now, to be honest. I'd like to say it's been years, but it hasn't. It's been a year. And at the very end of the book, Aaron draws me up and says, hey, where do you think we'll be in 2 years? And I remember thinking, 2 years? And he gives me some suggestions. And I've now taken that as a stepping off point for my next exploration. There were some things I thought I would do in this time when Aaron got stable, when Aaron could manage on his own, when I turned 50, when this book was published, when I sold my house. Now I'm acting on them. Now I'm getting out of my own way and getting on with that. Yeah.
And what's he doing? What's Aaron doing?
So Aaron finished a degree at Ryerson. He
Awesome.
has now been working at he's working in the insurance field. He works on the claims side of insurance. He's
Okay.
just about to buy his first house.
That is amazing. And does he have a lovely lady or gentleman in his life?
At the moment, no. And there is a little scene of that in the book. I think during COVID, it would be impossible to meet anyone, though.
Absolutely.
I'm convinced.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think he'd like to fill that void, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, that's
Thanks for asking. I love that.
What,
I love that question about how Aaron is. Thank you.
yeah. And once you find yourself, you know, it's time to share. And so I think he's there and you're there. And that's a really beautiful thing.
Thank you. That's lovely.
Thanks so much for your question, Suzanne. And now we have some other hands. This is so exciting. Okay.
Tali loves the hands, everyone.
I love the hands. It's so exciting. And I feel bad. I'm like, I hope their hands aren't getting tired, but then I remember their virtual hands. Anyway.
Good one, Tali.
Okay. So Kate Johnson, let's hear your question.
Hi.
Hi, Kate.
Hi. I have to agree with what Tali said earlier. I could listen to you guys for hours. And this was a really, really lovely talk. And I apologize if my question is repeating anything. I did miss a bit of the beginning of the talk, but I really wanted to know more about how you first knew that this was going to be a book and that you needed to write about it. And I wanted to know from beginning of the idea to getting published. Obviously you don't have time to go into that whole process, but from figuring out that this was going to be a book and basically how long was the journey?
Right. I'd love Maria to comment on that too, because we both went through very traditional processes to get published. Do you want to speak about that one, Maria, for a sec?
Well, in my case, my book started out with the idea of essays, and then it transformed over time to a connected idea that eventually became the memoir. It was 4 years from beginning to end, so it was a long process and a long process of playing.
It is, and I went through 2 full iterations with this book because I thought it was done once, and I did agent once and seek publication once with a very different book that was a very clinical story when Aaron was in active treatment. That was back in sort of 2014, actually 2015. And then we had a turning point of what was the second, what I call round 2, where he was going into maybe radiation didn't work, and we found ourselves in a whole other wave of accepting the normal. And that was when I extracted the book into somewhat the form that it is now, and took another year or 2 to proposal it and really get strengthen the narrative that it is now, that it is my story in which Aaron is the most significant other character. And you know, all told, I don't know how many years I'd say. I probably spent 1.5 years each time that I wrote it. And then I spent a long time, as you know, Kate, I spend a lot of time on proposals, and I spent a lot of time proposaling this and trying to find a sensitive publisher that would do justice to the book. It's a long process, and memoir in particular evolves as you write it because you're still living it in almost every case. I know that I've met memoirists. Thanks for that great question. I'm so glad you jumped in.
Me too. And I know there's some other questions, so I'll just do a quick follow-up for both of you. And I'm especially glad you mentioned that this was a completely different book and before you were writing it while you were going through it. So so again, for both of you, do you feel that it was much harder to write while you were going through it, or you needed that bit of space from it to be able to write about it and do it justice?
Maria?
I have a bit of an opinion about this kind of thing. I think it's really necessary to have some space to write well about your own story. I think that trying to write about it while you're absolutely in the thick of it is sort of counterproductive. I think there is something about beginning to see the other shore that you can then, I don't know, I think it just gives greater perspective. It makes for a richer story, because you have the story that is contained in the original events, and then you have another story laid on top of that, that is the recollection of it, and how the writer has been changed.
I couldn't have written it any sooner. I wish I could have, because it would have been cathartic. But I didn't have an ending, and I didn't know what it all meant. And I didn't know what it all meant until Erin showed it to me. And Maria has always seen this, and certainly sees it yet again today, that Erin represents a truth that I could not represent for myself. I couldn't see what it all meant, but he did. He did, and he didn't express it. But when he finally took me in the underground parking lot that day, we're leaving the hospital, and I didn't realize we were living the ending to the book. Although when I got in the car, I said, I think you just wrote the ending to the book. And I swore at him as usual in my way and said, way to go. Like, you just stole the ending of the book too. And he said, Mom, we're not assholes. It is time to go and get a life. And this is those who know him and love him. That's how he talks to me. And I don't know where he gets it. But I couldn't have written it any earlier, because we weren't done. And quite frankly, tears pouring down my face. He wasn't okay. So I wasn't okay. And I couldn't write it until I was able to see what it meant. And he told me what it meant.
Patti, towards the end of your book, you reference the line by Susan Sontag, "The Kingdom of the Sick."
Right.
And I think it's only when you've been through the experience and have a position where you can begin to reflect on it, that you can see the full kingdom of the sick, that,
yes.
that is this really rich, multi-layered experience that has occurred. And the only way that you can really see all corners of it is by standing back of it.
Mm-hmm. You can't see your own participation in it when you're taking up space in it. You know, you're a participant in something that there's a plexiglass shield preventing you from feeling all the feels. And boy, did I ever notice that when Erin does come to me in that scene where he's wagging a blue piece of paper in my face, going, and I'm panic stricken because he's bringing me an appointment slip, and he's not panic stricken. He was playing with me a little bit, but that the traumatic reactions were so repetitive for us for 10 straight years that I couldn't see that I inhabited a place almost no one could go with me. And I'm just now stepping out of living in a place where I anticipate trauma around every corner, which certainly, to Suzanne's question, is how I learned to live, and breaks my heart to think that he did too. I hope I lifted some of that burden, but you can't write, I don't believe, you can't write a meaningful memoir about trauma while in it, because the conclusions can't be drawn yet.
Right. Well, thank you so much. That was a beautiful conversation.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks so much for your question. Now I'm going to turn over to one of our questions, or our first question in the Q&A box. So from Kayla, she says, "Hey there, I've really enjoyed listening to you both. First of all, I'm one of those people who have a chronic and relatively unknown illness. I've been in and out of hospitals. I've been through sick kids, though they didn't help much for me due to the fact that they didn't know what was wrong. The isolation you spoke of was just so familiar. It really isn't easy, and then to write it all down again. How did you do that? I imagine you must have found writing about it painful. So how did you get past it?"
You know, I don't mean to be coy, but I don't know if I did get past it. I mean, my disappointment in the children's medical services that we received, it's never gone away. I had such hope that because Erin was 16, there would be some sensitized treatment for him, or at least a sensitized atmosphere. And, you know, I've walked the halls of sick kids looking for a home for us, for our whole family, and we didn't find it. Maybe the nature of his disease, you know, he's adult sized at 16. He was relatively mature. I needed the surgical team at an adult hospital, but there was only one way to write it, and that was to force myself to relive it. And I did that many, many times to revise it and get it right, and had beautiful readers like Maria hold my hand and help me relive it so that I could get the salient pieces of it. And I suppose this is where I step into the memoir coach field here, which is I withheld a lot more than I told. I wanted the reader to infer that there were repetitive experiences like the ones I told. I didn't want to have to name 6 doctors and 12 hospitals. For the most part, Erin's health was championed by many, many doctors and the world's experts because of its rarity, but that is not the experience for everyone else. And I will always lament the shortcomings of the medical community for paying attention to the big deal diseases and not seeing those less visible. Erin's disease is extraordinarily rare, but had it not been visually apparent or a little bit infamous, we may still be languishing for the kind of care that he needed to manage his lifestyle. And for folks like you have advocates like me 100% behind you. And I hope you've got somebody who speaks for you and with you about these kinds of challenges. Kayla, it is Kayla, I think.
Thank you so much for your answer there, Patti. And earlier we had a hand from Sally Delancey, and I know the hand was lowered. Oh, and it's back. Okay, Sally, over to you.
Hello, good night. Are you hearing me?
We are hearing you.
Hi, yes. I think most of the questions were, that's why I had lowered the hand. But I wanted to ask about the writing process in that, how exhausting it was at certain times. I know you mentioned the word cathartic, so I know that it would have provided of catharsis for you. But I work in social services, and most times you hear clients say, it's so difficult and exhausting to keep telling the same story again and again. And I know that you would have written and would have had to go through the editing process. So that story would have been in your face. How did you deal with that?
Wow, very, very, you're so exactly right. That's so astute. Part of it is I'm a professional writer, so I forced myself. Part of it was a deadline. Another piece was that I did craft amalgams of some scenes sometimes because I lost details in my own experience. I didn't want to sit with them, Sally. I didn't want to relive them exactly. Very, very occasionally I asked Aaron, and he did not want to go there. I'll tell you what the best thing was is that I talked to people and they remembered for me, or they triggered my memory. And I had the support that I rejected in my earliest experience, sort of between 2009 and 2012. Everyone that watched me and stayed close to me memorized the details. I could ask, 1 of 5 people to relive an experience for me, and I think they could. The medical appointments, those are different. And there's nothing to say except doing the extraordinarily hard work of wishing that it wasn't so and writing it again and again, and then handing it to an editor to tell me if I've been spare enough to make it resonate with people. You're right, it's exhausting.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your question, Sally. So we have—
This is fascinating. I see questions coming up that are written. I can see questions in chat. This is amazing. Thanks, everyone.
So a question from Heather that came in through the Q&A. So Heather says, love the book. Your writing allowed me to venture into your life and felt so honored to be able to live your experience through you and your family. It also gave validation to my experiences and my journey of when life turns a 360 and you are solely focused on surviving. How laughter becomes such a gift in tough times was the light that carried me through the difficult times you went through. Are there any patterns that you still have from those difficult times? And do you have any new patterns to break free of those times for your own growth?
Wow. So there's a downside to humor. It's also called avoidance. And the boys and I, Aaron and Justin and I, have some bad habits around avoidance. We don't lean into each other the way other folks lean into each other when they're having a problem. We come at it from really indirect ways. I have some bad habits with them of not confronting them directly when they need me, because the trauma of what we went through, which I now name trauma, and I didn't used to. We all carried it in different ways. I did not want to ignite a fire under the boys to relive their experience every time they needed to talk to me about something. So like if Aaron has a cold, I have to leave that alone. I have to wait for him to find a way to come to me. So the lasting impression of relying so much on humor, and also the lasting impression of knowing what my priorities are and not blowing things out of proportion too early. What came out of that is that I often don't foist myself into caring situations with the boys anymore because I want them to have back the independence that I feel like the trauma may have stolen from us. So we laugh a lot, but I think sometimes we hide behind it a little bit too, because it's not just a habit, it's a survival strategy and became part of the dynamic of our family. I wish it wasn't always true, but we sure do have a lot of fun. And I'd like to think that the onus is on all of us to step up and get the support we need when we really need it. I hope I haven't robbed them of the ability to ask me for help.
Thank you, Patti, and thank you so much for the question, Heather. So do we have any other questions? Any more hands we'd like to raise? Yes, a hand. Thank you, Monique.
Hi, thanks for letting me ask the question of Patti, and I will also put the question to Maria. Once you had your book out, so for Patti, it's about 7 months for you, and for Maria. So after 7 months of the book being published, have you had any second thoughts of wishing that you might have taken out a chapter or put in another one, or sort of like the cognitive dissonance, which is a marketing term? Are you looking at yourself going, what was I thinking, or am I crazy? Just curious how you're feeling 7 months after the launch.
Sure, I'll step into that. Maria, do you want to comment on that? I've never asked you this.
Well, I mean, my book came out 6 years ago. So, you know, I think something happens over time that it is what it is. I never look at it and think that there was something that I left out of it or should have done differently or put something in that I shouldn't have, or none of that. I think that what happens is that over time, if I were to write a memoir now, it would be a different story.
Good point.
And that would be for anyone, because our memory changes so dramatically over the years. Yeah, I wouldn't change anything.
You know, there's yeah, it's a great question, Monique. Thanks. I left a lot of dangling cables because I couldn't cover everything, and we cut, 60, 80,000 words of multiple versions. I mean, I'm a pretty prolific writer, even at my in the easiest of books, and this is not the easiest of books I've written. I had a wish list, so I don't have misgivings or things I would change. I had a wish list of things I wish I could have done more thoroughly, but for editorial reasons and to keep the momentum and keep it really spare and fast paced and keep people on the edge of their seat. And I didn't go into them. The mythology around giants, my rant about othering, my debate around difference, a lot more about Aaron's experience could have been in there. But again, that wasn't my story. So I trusted the year of editing and my editor's eyes to say, no, that's another book. Let's not do that here. Let's not distract. I also trusted my editor to pare down the things that I might have regretted later. And this is where the professionalism spoke for me. It was, we really don't care about your divorce. Those weren't my editor's words, but she would say, let's just represent him as Aaron's dad and leave it at that. Your parents and how they reacted to you as a mother of a sick kid, let's keep it to that. And I'm really glad that I didn't include more on those things, or maybe I would regret. But, the things that I would have liked to have done longer, I would like to do those differently, but I'll do those in another book. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Well, we have 2 minutes left, so if anyone would like to answer, or not answer, to ask one last quick question, then now is the time.
I can't believe my sister's hand isn't going up now. Love you.
Oh,
Oh.
here we go. Kelly. Oh,
Hi, Kelly. Are you there? Unmute yourself.
yes.
I love you too. That's all I'm saying. Nothing else. I'm honored, proud. Yes, I'm really her loud, obnoxious sister, but that's what I'm saying. I wouldn't have put my hand up, but you kind of taunted me into it.
Peer pressure.
Oh, thanks so much, Kelly.
Thank you, Tali, for this wonderful exploration of Loving Large. It's an honor, truly, to be featured by you.
Well, thank you both so much for being here. I will just speak on behalf of everyone, which I rarely do, and say that this was an incredible hour and a half and the best Monday I've had in a very, very long time. So thank you both so much for being here. Everyone, if you do not have a copy of Loving Large yet, you must get your hands on it. If you would like your copy signed, then please reach out to Patti directly, or you can send me an email and we will make sure that we make that happen. And if you would like to support your local bookstore, then please find Loving Large there, or you can also
make them order it
on
yes
Amazon. Yeah,
did you tell everyone that they're getting special goodies from you?
Thank you for reminding me, Patti. Yes, so especially because you have all stuck around until the very end of the event, you will know that in your inbox we will drop some very, very special goodies that will allow you to get a taste of Loving Large, even beyond everything that you have seen and heard this evening. So be sure to look out for that. And of course, the recording will be made available to you, and you will get an email, so you can rewatch this conversation as many times as you would like. So with that, thank you all so much for being here. It was a pleasure to spend the evening with you, and we hope to see you again very soon.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Tali. Thank you, Patti.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Good night.